Alright, for today's critical thought, we have a very interesting topic. I want to talk about vision versus execution when it comes to both building a video game and being able to review or examine it. Now, we talked a little bit about this on last week's Game Wisdom live show, but I want to go into more detail about it here. Now, when it comes to any kind of game, regardless of genre, platform, or studio, how the game is, structured in your head can be vastly different from what's on the screen, what someone's going to play. And this leads to some very interesting discussions when it comes to unique or polarizing genres. Because you may not like a game, but does that game represent the very best or the better qualities of that respective genre? And again, this can also lead into talks on game journalism as well as making a game that's marketable. But those two may be a little too big for today's topic. Now, when it comes to looking at a game from the vision and the execution standpoint, this can be very tricky. Because as we just said, video games can go through massive and sometimes complete rebuilds in terms of their design and structure over the course of its development. Now, obviously, the earlier in development that something like that would happen is obviously better. And this is where we've talked about the virtues of playtesting. And how just because a game may look and sound amazing in your head doesn't mean the same thing when it gets put in front of dozens, if not hundreds of eyes on early access, your own private beta, public beta testing, and so on. And there's a very tricky element when it comes to adhering to your vision versus changing it to hopefully make a better game. When I spoke with Charles from Java Technologies when he was doing the game Concealed Intent, he talked about how a lot of the game, in terms of its mechanics and structure, was malleable. If enough people were going to argue about something or suggest something, he would be willing to change it. Except when it came to the game's overall major system of using like heat signature or radar, I forget the exact term he used, to conceal yourself during the space battles, which are supposed to be reminiscent of sub-base warfare. And he said that if you change that, then the entire vision of the game, the entire structure of the game falls apart. And like I said, this becomes very tricky when it comes to talking about unique or polarizing genres. For instance, like as a counterexample, we can look at major games, Mario, Zelda, Call of Duty, Battlefield, and the like, and these are games with their designs, firmly or rigorously refined over and polished over months, if not years, to get the very best version of it. And it's very easy in these games to see what the developer had in mind and then be able to play a game that is enjoyable. But what about games that aren't that structured, aren't that refined? For instance, when I think of the visual novel genre, I am not a big fan of that genre, and I've only played a few that I've actually been able to get through. But how can you tell what are the best and worst elements of that genre to be able to critically review it? As an interesting point, I've been talking to other Josh on our Discord channel, and he was telling me about one idea he would love me to try and do is to do a critical look at games that really don't necessarily warrant that critical examination or have even gotten it in the past, such as being able to critically look at a game like Madden, or what we're doing with the games of ill repute analysis that I still need to get to. But that's a very interesting point when it comes to reviewing a game and being able to critically talk about it. Again, you can give a copy of Mario Odyssey, Battlefield, Assassin's Creed, you name it, to just about anyone who writes about video games, and they'll be able to write a pretty decent review about it, because those games are laid out enough so that anyone can enjoy them. But here's a question. Could someone write a critical analysis on the game design of Kim Kardashian's Hollywood, on Getting Over It, on even something like Surgical Simulator or I Am Bread? In these games, they were designed around a very explicit vision, and we could argue that the vision and the execution were perfect. But does that necessarily make a good video game? Again, over the last summer, we saw a lot of people argue about Cuphead in terms of its difficulty. But that would be another case of a developer whose vision and execution were perfect. They basically put everything they had and then some into getting Cuphead out. And at that point, it really becomes less about making a game that is, I think, 100% marketable, but just making a game that you want and what your fans want. Another really great example of this would obviously be Dwarf Fortress. Dwarf Fortress has certainly grown and become its own monolithic, it's actually become its own genre over the years from the two brothers making it. But with that said though, it is a game that is entirely designed around their vision. And they don't really care about marketing it, they don't care about selling it. And at the end of the day, they are just literally making a game for themselves. And raises again that interesting question. How do you review a game like that? Dwarf Fortress has some issues. It's not exactly the most accessible game. The UI and of course the graphics aren't the most amazing. But there are people who have obviously been willing to overlook that for the depth that lies under the surface. And again, this raises another interesting point, and I didn't want to get too much into reviewing games, but it certainly can be pulled up here. What is the best level of skill for someone to be able to critically examine a game? Like I said a few minutes ago, I'm not a visual novel guy. So could I give that a game of that genre a fair review? Or taking things further, if we had the very best example of the visual novel genre, would that be a game that I could enjoy? Because I've had cases like this, and there'll be an upcoming video talking about in terms of my own play style. But there have been games over the years that surprised me by allowing me to enjoy a genre or design that I didn't think I would have. And we've certainly seen examples of that, or seen those breakout games. For instance, we could talk about Undertale with this retro RPG. You could talk about Dark Souls with brutal challenge, or just hardcore challenge, depending on who you talk to. But we've seen those gateway games that have been released over the years. But then conversely, if you give me the worst example of a visual novel game, could I tell the difference between the two? Between a good and a bad one? I don't know. And that raises this very interesting point again about being able to look at or being able to examine what the developer put down and whether or not that matches their vision or what they marketed the game as. But going back to my extreme example, if I tell you that I'm making a brutally difficult game that no one can beat, and I throw you a 2D platformer with like one jump and that's it, well then I certainly didn't match that vision. But it also raises additional questions when it comes to what it means, or what the developer's vision means when it comes to reviewing a game. As we've said and we've joked many times on our videos, a lot of games have been calling themselves the Dark Souls of something. And I'm sure that many developers, as they're trying to come up with their mission statement or their overall view of their game for their design doc, probably said it's like Dark Souls, but so on. And the question is, does that remove or mitigate issues that you have with your game? Going back to what we said with Getting Over It, that is a game that was intentionally designed to be frustrating and cumbersome. But that's what the developer wanted. And this is where we get this is like one of the major points for today's piece, because we've talked about this before. There is a very big difference in intent between unintentionally making your game a certain way versus intentionally making it a certain way. And even though things may not work on both cases, having that be a major part of your design, I think that makes things a little bit different. If I design a game and it's frustrating to play and it controls poorly and I didn't set out to do that, then I am going to be reamed and, raked over the coals for it. But what about games like Octodad, Surgical Simulator, Getting Over, and so on that were designed explicitly like that? That was the vision of the game from square one. Do you reward games for following their vision all the way through? Or is it more important to make a game that's marketable? But with that said, we then go down the rabbit hole of saying, well, if you want to make a game that's marketable, then you have to remove some of your unique elements to it. And like I said, that is a whole nother topic for another day. But here's my question. This is going to be our big one for today, and I want to get your thoughts on this one. This is taken from my Dissecting Design of Getting Over It. But, like I said, Getting Over is a game that was explicitly designed to be frustrating. Imagine someone designing a car with your steering wheel on the ceiling, pedals on the dashboard, and your rearview mirror in the back seat. And that was not done by mistake. It was made 100% to be that way. So the question is, do you give that game a good review or a bad review? Do you say that it's good because this is what the developer wanted? Or do you say it's bad because that's what the developer wanted? Again, this is like Schrodinger's cat, I guess, when it comes to video game reviews. But let me know what you think in the comments below, and thanks for watching this video. If you'd like to suggest a topic for a future vlog, please let me know in the comments below. But otherwise, be sure to check back daily for discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Check back around 10 Eastern for regular streaming. If you'd like to suggest games for me to cover or topics to talk about, let me know in the comments below. For a collection of my writings as well as weekly podcasts on design, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the Game Wisdom Patreon, you can find us on there on patreon.com/gwbicer. $1 will get you into our private Discord channel where we talk game topics and more. $5 will get you voting privileges for any major event, including the Saturday Night Grab Bag, Patreon-funded goals, and more. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you enjoy more videos here on the Game Wisdom YouTube channel.